Welcome back. All right, so a topic that I wanted to discuss, and I've had some people ask me if I've seen it, so I figure I'm halfway through the series. I might as well talk about it. And that is the Mr. McMahon mini series documentary going on right now on Netflix. And if you're a wrestling fan, it may feel familiar, especially if you're my age. I know that listening to Jim Cornette's review, especially when it comes to the first episode, there was a lot of, well, we've seen this, we know this, didn't really learn anything. But the documentary is kind of designed to go towards a more general audience, an audience that didn't watch wrestling in the 80s, had no idea what was going on. When I was growing up, I had times where people would find out I was a wrestling fan, and the question that I would get was always, "Well, don't you know it's fake? Why do you watch that for? It's all fake. Why do you watch that? It's not real. You actually think you can hit a guy in the head with a chair like that, and they get up? You're wow, this guy over here, this is stupid." So people who had that opinion would not have been watching, obviously, or they would have been watching and not wanting to admit to their friends they were watching. That definitely happened in school. I know that happened, but at any rate, wrestling has always kind of been just this niche thing that people don't pay attention to as much as I think it warrants or it deserves. There are definitely some excellent wrestlers who are great athletes. Um, Pretty decent when it comes to the acting side of it too. Some of them are bad. Yep, some of them are bad, but some of them are really good. And so I do still enjoy the product, but I was always kind of torn. My opinion on Vince McMahon really turned with the steroid trial. So they cover the steroid trial, and I always thought the federal government was overreaching with the, oh, he's selling it, and I thought, no. I remember at the time thinking, you guys are close, but no. And the reality was that, and they mentioned this in the documentary, he didn't have to encourage anybody to use steroids. All he had to do was make sure the muscly guys are at the top. So your Hulk Hogan's, your Ultimate Warriors, Hercules, these guys that are Rick Rude's another one was just ridiculous. And so it was pretty obvious that if you want to move up the card, it's important to work on the physique. So like the British Bulldog went from a pretty muscular guy to all of a sudden being chiseled. And once that happened, I remember my friends and I being like, "Yeah, so looks like the British Bulldog is on steroids." And it was at the same time where we were seeing that in baseball, where baseball players would be skinny baseball players, and then the next year, big bulked up guys, with biceps out to here, and I'm like, okay, so yeah, it's definitely there. And then so the idea that, well, people didn't know there was a problem. Everybody knew. Everybody knew that these guys were using what they were using. So it was a known thing. But Vince didn't have to sell any. Vince didn't have to push anybody to do it. It was just, little comments about this guy's physique or that guy's physique, or a guy wouldn't be in the same shape. One example from more and recent's using the term loosely, but Chris Masters was a wrestler who was very that his whole shtick was his physique. His whole shtick was his physique, and he was a big muscular man, and then he decided to stop. No more steroids. And he dropped a lot of muscle mass, a ton. And he was out. He was out. He was still the same wrestler. He could still go in the ring. But because he wasn't chiseled and big and he wasn't the masterpiece, well, there goes your gimmick, so out you go. And wrestling's like that. Without guaranteed contracts, and not everybody has had a guaranteed contract, and even now in the era of guaranteed contracts, if they can find a way to cut you, they will. And there's always the fine print. The fine print gets brought up here and there during the documentary. I'm thinking, yep. There's almost always that fine print. But the steroid trial drove me nuts because we knew they were using. We knew they were using, and that trial was about the wrong thing. And I'm not even sure if a trial was the right way to go about it. But you could tell that they were selling a product where guys had physiques that weren't. I mean, you could get like that, but naturally is a lot longer to get there, and it's a lot harder to stay there than without a little bit of help. Just a little bit of help, right? And so, I like when Vince. I remember the bodybuilding thing, and they really gloss it over. The bodybuilding show they had was awful. it didn't fail because of the steroid trial. It failed because it was a terrible idea. No one wants to sit and watch a bodybuilding show every week. I don't know what Vince was thinking there, but yeah, it didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense. It was an awful idea. But the idea that Vince wasn't a very nice guy was out there right around that steroid trial time. And I remember hearing things here and there. It was mostly the dirt sheets. They talk a lot about Phil Mushnick. And Mushnick, I remember reading his stuff and I remember thinking, you hate the product so much. Why do you cover it every single week? And he talks about how, while I was trying to bring Vince down, okay, there's a lot of guys there who are relying on WWE for, their ability to pay their rent and to eat, and this is their livelihood. But by all means, if you want to bring down the company that's the top company in the world because you don't like Vince, it's an odd thing to do. And that's something I've had to do as a wrestling fan for a long time. Say, I'm a wrestling fan, I hate Vince McMahon. And to have those things and try to rationalize why I would still watch WWE when I don't want Vince to get any money from my fandom of WWE, which was WWF at the time. Um, and then the screw job happened. So Bret Hart was my favorite wrestler. They kind of gloss over, and I'm gonna take issue with something Vince said. Vince said that Bret wasn't very. I think it was enigmatic was the term that he used. He wasn't very. He wasn't great on the mic, being the idea. Bret Hart came across as just real, just a normal, everyday, down to earth guy. And he didn't cut like these long winded major promos. But when he would grab a microphone and go, I'm going to kick that guy's ass, I would think, you go, Bret. Cool. And I was fine with keeping things brief. I didn't think that was a big deal, but clearly the ability to speak, the ability to get your character across, what Vince looks for, and what I think is passable, are two different things. They did get into the Lex Express part. I didn't like Vince. I didn't like Lex Luger, and I knew Lex Luger would never work as a face. So face is the good guy, heel's the bad guy, and I knew Lex would never work as a face. They talk in the documentary about how he didn't connect with the crowd, and he just couldn't. He didn't come across as a nice guy. And I'm not saying he wasn't in real life a nice guy. It just on TV didn't work. So he body slams Yokozuna, and they'd already realized at that point, we don't. He's not going to be the guy we're going with, right? So eventually Bret gets it. They made the stupid move of going back to Hogan, which they did. I feel like it was more than once that they went back to the well with Hogan when they should have let it go. I remember when The Undertaker beat him, and then he had to get the belt back from Taker right away. And I really groaned at that. I was like, man, you guys, you got to stop, because I don't think people who are younger can understand just how nauseating it could be to have Hulk Hogan champ for, what was it, 6 years? Something like that. But he would only defend the title a handful of times a year, and you could tell he wasn't going to lose. I think the most frustrating feud that I watched was the one between him and Orndorff. I thought Paul Orndorff was a better wrestler. I thought he did a good job of cutting promos. I thought he was excellent in every area of the exhibition, for those who don't want to call it a sport. But you knew Paul Orndorff was never going to beat Hulk Hogan. So the standard was that, okay, this guy's Hulk Hogan's new friend. Well, they're going to turn on him. That's always how it works. Anytime Hogan had a friend, they were just setting up the next feud. And what we know now is that Hogan didn't want anybody to be more popular than him. So word got around that when Randy Savage turned heel, part of it was Hogan understood that Randy Savage was becoming more popular, and so the best way to squash that was to turn him to the bad guy, right? Um, and it's just it's frustrating as a wrestling fan watching that. So I mean, again, think about it. So I didn't like Vince, and I didn't like Hogan. And I always felt like I was in this really small minority of people that didn't like Hulk Hogan, because anytime his stupid music would hit, everybody would hit the roof and I'd be booing him. I cheered for Andre in WrestleMania 3. I wanted Andre to beat him. When Andre came out and tore the shirt off of him and in Piper's Pit, I was like, finally, this is great. This is awesome. I love this. So, watching this documentary now and looking at how they portray Vince and Hogan and how they talk about it, I get it because they're telling the story, but I feel like they're glossing over some stuff. Like Hulk Hogan, his popularity faded as the years went on. And so making him the guy, okay, fine, but it's not going to make fans that don't like him suddenly like him. It's going to cause those fans to get louder. And it's going to cause more fans to say, you know what, you're right. Because Hogan was never a very good wrestler. He was a good showman. He was great for promos, but he was not a good wrestler. And I say that because they showed him with a very limited move set. I have watched some of his stuff from the AWA. I thought he was a better wrestler before. I thought he was a better wrestler before he became this WWF character, and he would just, it was atomic drop, elbows, and like a double axe handle, and then you get the clothesline and then the leg drop. Like it was a very limited move set that Hulk Hogan had in WWF. Which then later on, almost a generation later, John Cena's getting told, oh, he doesn't have a good move set. And I remember thinking to myself, Cena's a really good wrestler. They just limit which moves he uses because they want that reaction from the crowd. But Cena was an excellent wrestler. So I never thought that Hogan and Cena, other than the fact that Cena was clearly the face they were trying to shove down everybody's gullet, and they were trying to do the same thing with Hulk Hogan a generation before. I didn't really see the comparisons between the two as being valid, and I always got the feeling that underneath, John Cena was just a pretty nice, down to earth guy. I never got that from Hulk Hogan, never. I remember there was one time I can't remember which match it was, and he smacked somebody with a chair and he got disqualified. And I remember saying out loud to the TV, "He's the good guy." Because in this case, the wrestler he's against didn't do anything nefarious. There was nothing really awful that they did. They were working as a heel, sure, but he picks up a chair and smacks him and gets disqualified. And I'm like, what the hell was that? He's the good guy. Why couldn't he just win the match fair? Why do you have to smack the guy? So this is where I started to become aware that Hulk Hogan would never lose clean. That was not allowed. He could not be seen taking a pin unless there was some shenanigans. He couldn't lose a match unless it was a DQ or a countout, and even then there has to be some shenanigans. And so I started resenting him, and then the resentment went towards Vince as well because I knew Vince was the one that was pushing this. So looking back now, and looking at when WCW took over, the mistake WCW made was they would try to every week had to be a huge week. Every week had to be a big deal. And what happened was they burnt out all their matches. They burnt out every major match you could imagine on free TV. So instead of drawing things out and telling these long-term, long-winded storylines that sometimes can go on a little bit too long, but sometimes they can be great, they would just, from week to week to week, which is something I think AEW has been guilty of at times as well, looking at current wrestling. But getting back to the Vince discussions, I thought Vince did a better job. And so as WCW goes, WWE builds new stars. He did talk about, the screw job and, I had to get the belt off Brett. Then put him against Taker. Put him against Taker. He would have dropped the belt to Taker. He suggested Taker, and it would have made total sense for The Undertaker to win the title. And if The Undertaker wins the title in Montreal, the thing is, I still think we would have got the Mr. McMahon character anyways. The Mr. McMahon character came out of the screw job, but we were starting to get that look behind the curtain a lot anyways. So Vince was going to become Mr. McMahon maybe later. Maybe it wouldn't have happened as quickly, but I still think it would have happened. I still think we would have seen the Mr. McMahon character on TV and he would have been a heel because that's kind of how that works. I've I've watched wrestling for over 40 years. I think that the state of wrestling right now, it's really, really strong. Whether it's WWE or AEW, and I have my issues with AEW, but it's a pretty good product, and WWE right now is putting on the best wrestling it ever has. So as the years go by with Vince, and I think he was surrounded with a lot of yes men. I think that was part of it. and surrounded by people that either were yes men or just were too scared to say anything. Wouldn't speak to him in a way that wasn't like, yes, Mr. McMahon, understood, Mr. McMahon. And if you got out of line, well, you're gone. Paul London, right? So Vince McMahon did this stupid storyline, and it was dumb, where he gets into his limo, and the limo blows up, and that was right before all the Chris Benoit crap happened. So they had to do away with that storyline immediately because the whole Chris Benoit thing happened right after. But as Vince is leaving the building, all dour and upset and whatever the hell was going on, all the wrestlers are all lined up, and I thought it was stupid. I'm like, why are all the wrestlers lined up for Vince leave? Like, this is dumb. What? Why would they do this? Like, this just makes it look like he's Caesar or something. This is silly. And Paul London had a smile on his face, so they fired him. They fired him because he had a smile on his face. It was a dumb storyline. It was a storyline they abandoned immediately. But London, you're being unprofessional. You're gone. You did a storyline where the CEO gets blown up in a limo. And you have to make sure that people know he didn't actually get blown up in the limo because he's a CEO. And you don't want to give this impression that the company's crazy and everything's all up in arms. So but that storyline and the fact that London lost his job, I remember not liking it. And this was around the time where I realized that smaller wrestlers, cruiserweights, weren't going to get a break. The only time that cruiserweights were treated well was when all the steroid fallout was still there, and Vince realized I have to take a break from the big beefy guys being champs. But it came back. It came back quietly, and you would start to see guys who clearly had to be using something to get that physique, and not much was said about it when it came back. Um, I know that there's the court case against Vince. I know that there are there's some horrible information out there from Vince, but I feel like from an early age, and I mean when he took over the company from his father, I think he had an impression of I can do whatever I want. These people who work for me, they're mine. Look at the verbiage he uses. So he's talking about Wendy Richter. Wendy Richter, and she all she wanted was money. Like he's talking about like, oh, she was being difficult. Being difficult, I gotta get the belt off her. Because she wanted to get paid. She knew what the gate receipts were. She knew how popular she was. And Wendy Richter was ridiculously popular. When I started watching wrestling, she was my favorite wrestler. Period. I know she wasn't a great wrestler. I know looking back she wasn't fantastic on promos, but as a kid, and I was what, 11 or 12, she was my favorite wrestler. And so I think she absolutely had a valid complaint about the fact that she wasn't getting paid a fair wage. And so when she decides I'd like to get paid a fair wage, well, Hulk Hogan will run to Vince as soon as he hears you say it. But if you say it to Vince, well, Vince will make sure that you get screwed over by checks notes, Fabulous Moolah. Yeah, it's a bad look. And if you don't know Fabulous Moolah's story, I'm not getting into it here because that could get demonetized. But not great, not great. And I'm not surprised that Moolah and Vince got along pretty well because I felt like they both viewed the wrestlers, in her case, the wrestlers she trained, and in his case, the wrestlers he employed, as being kind of their property, kind of their creations. And so they could kind of do whatever they wanted. And again, with Vince, I think that kind of got in his head. I'll agree with Jim Cornette on something too. I think they missed an opportunity with this documentary to try to really get into his childhood. So, to really understand Vince, and I don't think we can fully understand him ever, but it would help if we were in a position where we had information on his childhood, more information than just the surface level stuff. So that was frustrating because it's like, okay, that's an interesting plot point for a documentary, but we're gonna gloss over it and just go to WrestleMania 1. It was kind of fun looking at some of those moments from WrestleMania 1, and understanding that Vince McMahon Sr. didn't see where the business was going, but later neither did Vince Jr. He didn't see where the business was going either because to talk about the curtain call. And the curtain call was such an absolutely bewildering event. I remember at the time when that came out, and I was on the message boards, I was on internet at that time, and I remember thinking, that's really stupid. They just exposed the business. At the end of a match, you get up, you hug your opponents, you're yeah, yeah, and you're all hugging each other, and you're waving to the crowd. You just exposed the business. You all broke character because your buddies are leaving town, and that's a terrible decision right there. And now, of course, on some level that happens here and there in wrestling, but not like that, because I think people realize that was a little bit too far. The only one, of course, and the show talks about it, the only one that really paid the price for that was Hunter, because Sean had the belt. Sean was the champ. And of course, Nash and Hall, they both were on their way to WCW, so didn't hurt them at all. Hunter got buried for a while, but his work rate was really high, so eventually worked his way back up. I don't think it hurt that he married Stephanie McMahon, first in a plot line and then for real. Um, and I think that's definitely why Hunter's in the position he's in now. But I don't begrudge him for that. I have no reason to think him and Stephanie didn't actually fall in love. They make a nice looking couple. They've made various babies, and I'm sure that is an indication that they like each other on some level. And so there you go. I don't know why I referred to it as various babies, but I did. There you go. It's done. But I'm kind of torn on Hunter because when he was champ, they kept him there for way too long, and I think the thing with that too was that this was in an era where winning and losing, sometimes you'd see an opponent get humiliated. One thing that I think Vince lost sight of was sometimes there wasn't that payoff where a bad guy would say something stupid and so or really insulting, and you're like, okay, so now the good guy's got to get the revenge. Sometimes they didn't, and then they just move on to the next feud, and I'm like, oh, okay, so that happened. And I think as Vince got older, his ability to write the storylines for wrestling fell apart. His obsession with controlling every single part of the entire show was kind of crazy. And there was all these discussions of rewrites, constant rewrites all the time. Rewrite everything, rewrite. He would show up, the whole show would be plotted out, and he'd look and go, nah. And they'd have to start over from scratch. Because if Vince didn't like it, well, he didn't do it. So watching this documentary, I hope it shows people who didn't watch wrestling just how bad things were. I always felt bad for the wrestlers having to go through some of that. I feel awful for people who were mistreated by Vince during that era, and I think the wrestling world is better off without him. Like, I have issues with the way AEW's run. I have issues with Tony Khan as a booker. But as a human being, I've never heard anything about Tony Khan that would tell me he's not a good person. Is he in over his head? Maybe. Yeah. And is he a little cocksure when maybe he shouldn't be? At times, sure. But boasting and being kind of out there, that's kind of what a promoter does. Basically, wrestling is an evolved offshoot of the circus, of a freak show, and so you kind of have to be a little bit boastful, don't you? So I don't get the feeling that there's anybody right now in wrestling that is evil, but I did feel that with Vince. When the whole thing happened with Vince and he was getting thrown out of the company, I felt like it was about time. And I think a lot of wrestling fans felt like it was about time. Although, in the case of a lot of wrestling fans, it was the idea that Vince is out of touch with the product and he's out of touch with the fans, so we want him out. I was along the lines of he's out of touch with the product and the fans, and he's also objectively a terrible human being. So there was that. But I do hope that the documentary um, brings some closure for some people who didn't necessarily like Vince. For some of the wrestlers that Vince would um, treat really badly, I hope this helps them too. Because yeah, there were definitely some questionable decisions made about who did or didn't have a belt. And I think really, once I've watched the whole documentary and digested it, I think that maybe I need to do a video where I talk about wrestlers going back as far as the 80s that I feel like got buried or mistreated in WWE or maybe even in WCW as well, or in both. Wrestlers that I feel like were really underrated and didn't get their due. Chris Canyon's one that comes up for me often. Chris Canyon's one that I think was one of the most ingenious wrestlers. He would do moves that I'd never seen before in every match I watched. Every Canyon match, whether he was Chris Canyon or Mortis, he would do something in the ring, and I was like, I haven't seen that before. And I'd have to, look it up, and then if I'd recorded it, I'd rewind and watch it again. Be like, that's interesting. That's an interesting move he just did. And so when somebody's innovative like that, I think they deserve some kind of push. And it just never really happened for him. I felt bad for him there. And if you haven't watched The Dark Side of the Ring on Chris Canyon, I recommend it. I feel awful for him looking back, and there were definitely some wrestlers that have been on Dark Side of the Ring that I feel bad for them for how things went. But between Dark Side of the Ring and now the Mr. McMahon documentary, I think now people out in the general public who didn't watch wrestling are starting to see, yeah, there were definitely some major issues. And it's amazing that the business survived. It is amazing that wrestling's still on TV with some of the scandals that have gone that the industry's gone through. It's amazing it's still on TV. But if you've watched the Mr. McMahon documentary, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Again, we're 3 episodes in, but since I've watched wrestling almost every week since 1984, I have a feeling I know where the show's going because I've watched almost every week. But anyways, let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe in the event you have not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.